Hello everyone. Today's case is a tragic one, and it deals with some hard topics such as PDF-iles and trafficking. After a young troubled teen vanishes after visiting her father in the hospital. 15-year-old Meagan Pilon was born October 6th of 1997 to her mother Christine, who went by Alice, and her father Mark. She grew up in the area of Sudbury, a city in Ontario, 388 kilometers northwest of Toronto, known for its world-class mining centre. Alice also had an older son named Justin, who she brought into the relationship. Her father, Mark, worked as a cook at a Mr. Prime Rib restaurant, and her mother, Alice, a cleaner. However, they would split up in the early 2000s. Alice would eventually get homed at a motel by a local nonprofit. It was also said that Alice had a lot of traumatic experiences in her upbringing that would go on to affect her as an adult and lead to substance abuse. When Meagan was just 6 years old, her mother would overdose. According to Mark, Alice was bipolar and suffering from addiction, eventually relapsing and ODing. Now, sadly, I ended up finding a post that went into more detail about what may have happened to Meagan's mother, and this post read, quote, "Prior to her death, Christina underwent psychiatric treatment at the Sudbury General Hospital and was given temporary housing at the Canadiana Motel on Lord Street. The YMCA had a strict no-guest policy that was broken the night of February 14th, when Christine invited a male friend, Al, to her room to spend Valentine's Day with. When Christine did not respond to her early morning wake-up call the morning of February 15th, a chambermaid eventually checked the room several hours later and found 2 dead bodies. Al was naked on the bed, his back to the door. Christine was also nude, in a squatting position between both beds, her head slumped down between her shoulders. She was 35 years old. Both deaths were declared drug-related, though Al had apparently threatened to kill Christine during a group session at the same outreach program they attended together at the hospital," end quote. Leaving Meagan to often being at her grandmother's home, who raised her as a substitute mother. But it was said to be very difficult for this little girl growing up without her mom. Mark wanted to keep Justin and Meagan together, so he would end up moving them and himself into a 3-bedroom townhouse in the Ryan Heights neighborhood. Justin and Mark would end up having some issues, and Justin would eventually move out, leading Mark and Meagan to move into a 2-bedroom townhouse in a social housing complex on Place Hartebeest Road in Sudbury. Meagan would eventually be introduced to St. David's School, and eventually would become an altar server at Holy Trinity Parish. It was said that no matter how Meagan was feeling, she always had a smile on her face and was a breath of fresh air. Meagan seemed to have a hard time at first making friends at school, but she quickly became part of the St. David's family. But sadly, it's thought that Meagan would eventually fall into the wrong crowd. She'd eventually be sent to Youth Rocks for troubled teens, and a person who also attended at that time would say, quote, "She seemed to be a person that has a hard time fitting in, but was close to the friends she had. She was a bit weird at first, but once you got to know her, she was kind of great. Her dad is wonderful, and I know she loved him very much as he annoyed her. She loves music, and I feel that's how she expressed herself," end quote. Despite her struggles, Meagan also did some babysitting as a teen. Many people who she would babysit for would go on to say that she was a very polite and beautiful person who was energetic and bubbly. Friends would also corroborate that Meagan seemed to be full of life, energetic, loving, but also had her happy and sad days. She would laugh a lot, loved music, writing songs, and playing her guitar. And right off the bat, from the start, I could tell that Meagan was a typical teen from the 2010s. She loved Justin Bieber, One Direction, and Taylor Swift, and had posters plastered across the walls of her bedroom of all the bands she loved. She also always wanted to be on Facebook, which back in 2013 was a big app compared to today for the youth. It was also said she talked a lot about boys and how she wanted to be a rock star, and she loved screamo music. But as happy as Meagan seemed at her young age, she was also struggling a lot. As I said, she seemed to eventually fall in with a bad crowd, and this crowd seemed to be a rougher crowd, and at this point in time, she had struggled with both depression and addiction. Keep in mind, she was barely 15 years old. She began fighting with her dad a lot, storming out of the house. And Mark said he began to notice that his daughter was acting oddly. She often seemed very droopy, and she wasn't making eye contact as if she was on some kind of substance. I ended up finding that Meagan had a second Facebook account, and this one was very sad for me to find. She had a nickname of Crack Babe on there. This is also something that I find very disturbing. But it also showed that she was in a relationship sometime in 2013 as well. In one photo she posted where she was holding a bottle of alcohol, her brother ended up arguing with her in the comment section of this photo about how she shouldn't be posting this kind of stuff and that she was going to get in trouble again because she had promised that she was going to stop drinking. Justin saying, "Meagan, you're stupid. Why are you putting this on Facebook? That's how people get caught, and you promised me you were going to stop drinking." Meagan says, "This was fucking December 29, 2011. You dumb fuck. Can't you read? I did quit." Her brother said, "Okay, still. Meagan, you made that promise 2 weeks before the fact, remember?" Meagan then responded by saying, "Okay, like legit, who do you think you are? Calm your fucking shit. Okay, yeah, I remember. If I want to break it, I don't care." Justin then said, "Okay, Meagan, you made your choice. Do whatever you want. I'm done racking my brain wondering about you. I'm your fucking brother, the only one you have." And it just goes on from there. At one point, Meagan would end up telling her father that she had been SA'd. And as far as I seen, Mark took her to the police, but nothing seemed to come of that report. Mark, meanwhile, was also dealing with his own issues. He actually had chronic back pain. And because of this chronic back pain, he was also dealing with depression. And eventually, he would opt to get surgery on his back to try to solve the issue. Early in September of 2013, I have specifically seen the date the 11th. However, there is some argument about this date being accurate. Meagan would go and visit her father at the hospital. Mark at this time was recovering from that back surgery. And while he was in the hospital, Meagan was meant to be in the care of her grandmother. Mark would end up having a brief conversation with his daughter, and he would later describe her acting very strangely during their conversation. And he was concerned at this point because of her actions that she may have been on substances again. Now, there's also some controversy whether this statement is true because, according to Mark, after Meagan left, he would look out the window and see her getting into an unfamiliar two-door dark green Mustang. However, there have been disputes to this, saying that because of Mark's back surgery, he wouldn't have been able to look out the window and see this. So take that as you will. Later that day, it said that Meagan was last seen with some friends in the New Sudbury area. However, these friends have never been named. After Meagan had that visit with her father, she would never contact him again. And he spent that entire weekend trying to get in contact with her, messaging her, calling her, but got no response. And because he was bedridden in the hospital, he wasn't able to go figure out where she was, which must have just been so frustrating that your daughter is seemingly missing, she's not contacting you back, no one's seen her, and you can't do anything about it. Especially considering he thought she was back on substances and, his ex-wife also died from being on substances. Once Monday rolled around, Mark would have a friend go and check on the house to see if Meagan was there. But once this friend arrived at the home, Meagan was nowhere to be found, and the house looked to be trashed. And Mark would end up calling the Greater Sudbury Police to report his daughter missing. Meanwhile, Meagan's Aunt Ellen would end up helping the police search because Mark couldn't. But at first, police pretty much just thought Meagan was a runaway. Considering the circumstances with her having substance abuse issues, hanging out with this bad crowd, police weren't really taking her disappearance seriously. However, she was only 15 years old. She was a child. And the fact that she was involved with these kind of individuals, to me, I feel like police should have looked harder for her because she was more high risk for something bad happening. The last activity on Meagan's Facebook was said to be at 4:30 a.m. on September 13th. But it's unclear if Meagan made this post because the last time a family member seen her was on the 11th, around that time frame at the hospital. But months would pass with no answers, which is what made police finally realize that something may have actually happened to Meagan, and she wasn't just a runaway teen. Once Mark was able to get out of the hospital and go back home, he was finally able to see what had happened to his home, this home that had been trashed. Inside the home, he'd end up finding both Meagan's IDs as well as bank cards. But the big question was, who trashed their home? Was it Meagan? Was she trying to look for something? Was she upset? Or was it trashed because there was a struggle? 7 months after Meagan disappeared, her story would be featured on a show called Last Seen Alive. During this episode, a school friend named Kayla would claim Meagan had a boyfriend in his 30s, which, let's make that clear. That is not a boyfriend. That is a PDF file. Because again, Meagan was only 15 years old. And this episode honestly frustrates me because I hate when shows go into stuff like this because they were calling these guys Meagan's boyfriends when that's truly not what it is. Let's actually call it what it is. These guys are disgusting. They are PDF-iles that were preying upon an underage girl. And I hate when TV shows sugarcoat that stuff. But Kayla would claim that these 30-year-old men that were hanging around with Meagan also were often acting strangely as if they were also on substances. One place that Meagan frequented was a Tim Hortons on Cedar Street, where drugs were often said to be used and exchanged. Meagan's aunt Ellen would also search this coffee shop pretty early on in her disappearance and also claims that while she was there, she witnessed drugs being exchanged for money. This definitely wasn't a place for children to be hanging out. When you really look at the situation, you mix a naive young teenage girl who has gone through a lot in her young life with older men who are able to manipulate her and feed her drugs so that she's not lucid, and so they're able to manipulate her however they want. It is not a good situation. That is a very terrifying situation that we often see coincide with trafficking. And it's horrifying to me that these older men, these PDF-iles, were allegedly feeding this child drugs and doing whatever they wanted with her. There is no right situation where this 15-year-old girl should have been hanging around 30-year-old men, especially ones that were giving her drugs and doing drugs with her. And I can't imagine what happened to this young girl during these times. Years later, Meagan's brother Justin would actually claim that the day she disappeared, he had also hung out with her. However, he would take years, as I just said, to come forward with this information, which why? In this claim that Justin made, he said Meagan seemed to also be acting strangely that day as if she was high, and he claims that Meagan expressed that she was unhappy at home. Justin claims the two then smoked a joint and everything seemed fine. But again, it makes me wonder, why wait years to report this information about your sister, considering she's missing? You think that's something you would want to say very early on. Another big tip would come when Mark and Ellen began handing out missing persons flyers in the areas that Meagan would frequent. A woman would end up coming forward but would want to remain anonymous, claiming to be a former neighbor of Mark and Meagan. She claimed that Meagan had been befriended by a 21-year-old woman named Wynonna Moore, which is when she began to get more promiscuous, which again, is something I do not want to say about a 15-year-old girl, but that is what was stated. It was claimed that Wynonna often tried to get Meagan to drink and do drugs with her. And shockingly, it was also claimed that Wynonna was pimping Meagan out, Wynonna being the one to make these calls to set up the dates. And again, keep in mind, these weren't dates, these weren't hookups, this wasn't a consenting adult performing sex work. This was a 15-year-old girl being set up to BSA'd by PDF-iles who are allegedly paying Wynonna for this. And if this was all true, this was a young girl being trafficked right under the nose of her family, which is so terrifying to think that these things can happen in plain sight. During the episode, the family's PI would attempt to locate Wynonna and ended up traveling 134 kilometers away to an area called Serpent River, where the PI and Ellen were able to set up a meeting with Wynonna. Now, why Wynonna ended up actually showing up to be filmed for this TV show, I don't understand. It's a little odd to me that someone involved with a missing teen girl who was allegedly their pimp would show up to be recorded and talk about the stuff on camera. Seems very risky to me as the criminal, but alas, it apparently happened. Now, Wynonna would deny pimping out Meagan, but she did solidify that Meagan was being set up with at least 5 different men. Afterwards, Wynonna would end up saying that she got tired of hanging out with Meagan because her dad got upset when Meagan was looking at adult websites because Wynonna was showing her adult websites. Again, I don't know why a 21-year-old would want to be hanging out with a 15-year-old anyways, unless it was something nefarious. I ended up finding a photo that Meagan had actually posted with Wynonna on that second Facebook page that I found of hers. So Wynonna does exist, and she was hanging out with Meagan. It wasn't just something for television. There is nothing that a 21-year-old and a 15-year-old should have in common. And I think this case really solidifies that it's not just men involved in these very dark things such as trafficking, but there's also women as well. And it's been talked about before where young women are used to lure in other women into these scenarios. And that may have been allegedly what was happening in this case. Although again, Wynonna denied all of that. Wynonna did, however, for one reason or another, give a description of a man that Meagan was seeing for money, aka was being assaulted by a. Now, she claimed that this PDF-ile allegedly gave multiple different names to them, so they didn't know his real name, but he was described as a white male standing 5'8" tall and drove a white pickup truck. So after getting this information, the PI ended up setting up a sting pretending to be a teen girl and lured this PDF-ile to a meeting with them. It would turn out that this monster actually had a wife and children. It is so sad, so scary. They didn't, however, reveal his name or show his face. I really wish they would, so everyone would know who this monster is. But they ended up seemingly letting him go after intimidating him into putting the word out that they were looking for Meagan, because they thought that if they infiltrated this kind of ring, they would be able to get the word out, and that if Meagan was being held somewhere or somewhere out there and didn't know if people were looking for her, she would know now. After the episode aired, unsurprisingly, there were a lot of rumors and tips coming in revolving around Meagan being trafficked, because that was kind of the center of the episode. However, police kind of seemed annoyed by this because it wasn't really the direction they were going. One theory that was spoken about was a witness that had allegedly come forward claiming that Meagan was at a house where she took a hit of fentanyl and instantly died from it. It was then said that her body was discarded in a river by pimps that owned the home that she was in. So I don't know how that's not tied to this whole trafficking thing, but it truly does seem like, with the information that they do have, that she was tied into this dark, dark world. And another very horrifying rumor that was swirling around, Meagan was essayed and then murdered by a gang near a prison. There seems to be an endless amount of terrifying stories about what happened to Meagan after she left the hospital. And her family at the time seemed to believe that she had been lured off and trafficked. Despite this, they also believe that the most likely scenario is that she's no longer alive, but they still won't stop searching for her until she's found. Mark has also left his daughter's room in the same state it was when she disappeared, unable to change a thing. A year after Meagan disappeared, her beloved grandmother would also pass away without answers. Information would also come out that Meagan had possibly last been seen in the Espanola area, a town 71 kilometers southwest of Sudbury. Detective Staff Sergeant Barry Ornella of the Greater Sudbury Police would say that he had not let this investigation run cold.
Sudbury girl, gone for nearly a year now, is the subject of a Crime Stoppers appeal tonight. Teenager Meagan Pilon hasn't exactly disappeared without a trace, but police and her family believe she's fallen in with the wrong crowd, and they're concerned for her safety. Here's CTV's Gord Nichols.
Meagan Pilon was 15 years old when she was first reported missing. That was 10 months ago. Last seen in the downtown area of Sudbury, the teen has reportedly been sighted in Espanola and West Nipissing in North Bay. So far, there's been no concrete connection. Still, her father refuses to give up hope.
I have my some friends that are there for support, and even I've got people from Michigan emailing me saying that if they could be closer, they'd love to help, and it was like very touching.
But nothing. You've heard
absolutely nothing. No, not a word.
Detective Constable Catherine Hucall is the missing persons coordinator for Greater Sudbury Police and is handling the file.
Meagan's case is an ongoing investigation. We are still actively following up leads and tips and constantly contacting friends, family, anyone within the community to see if they have seen her, know where she is.
Meagan Pilon's story has also been a focus of Sudbury Rainbow Crime Stoppers on several occasions. And today, the organization again asked the public for help.
We remind people that if you have seen Meagan Pilon, if you want to remain anonymous, then by calling Crime Stoppers, we can pass on the information to the investigators, and that way there, no one is aware as to where the information is from.
Detective Constable Hucall says the file will remain active until the young lady is found, and she has a message for Meagan. She says everyone just wants to make sure she's okay.
Well, it's been more than 2 long years for a Sudbury family of a missing teen. Meagan Pilon was last seen on September 11, 2013, leaving Health Sciences North after visiting her father. Was she lured away from home by someone, somehow? CTV's Alan Everson talks to the family.
This father says he is heartbroken. His daughter, Meagan Pilon, disappeared just over 2 years ago.
I'm like pretty much a dead man walking. I have no motivation. My sleeping's erratical. My eating, pretty much everything.
It's a father's worst nightmare. His daughter goes missing, and he believes she may have been lured into the sex trade. She was just 15.
It's killing me inside. Every time I'm driving, I'm looking for her, and even driving where the ladies of the night tend to walk. I've been driving there quite often, but to no avail.
Meagan's aunts have plastered these posters all over Sudbury. They strongly believe she was lured away from home.
What was found out when Meagan first went missing, and this is proven police records, that in a couple different instances, adult males were involved with Meagan. The one was even while Meagan was still at home. Meagan would meet with him and for drugs, for booze, and assumably for sex.
Sudbury Police confirm this is still an active case and say they receive tips on a weekly basis. The family is urging anyone with information to share it, and they're also making an appeal to Meagan.
Meagan, if you're out there, please just pick up the phone, block your number, call one of us, let us know that you're alive and this is what you want, and we'll leave you alone. We'll always love you. We won't give up.
So now, 2 years later, the agonizing wait continues for some sign of Meagan.
Police are relying at this point at a witness coming forward and relaying information that can lead to solving the case. The issue with this is, if Meagan truly was hanging around these individuals, they most likely aren't going to just come forward. They're not going to snitch on each other. They're not going to out themselves for being involved in something as horrible as what they may have been involved in, because they could be arrested for it. So why would they come forward? Most of these individuals aren't great people, and they're not going to come forward out of the greatness of their hearts. On top of that, as time passes, memories can fade. Surveillance footage has been lost. But possibly continuing to talk about this case and spreading the word on Meagan's story and her situation could hopefully land in the right eyes and spark a memory. This case isn't that old. I think it's definitely still solvable. Meagan's Aunt Carol would say, quote, I feel like she's with her mom now, but I feel she's not far from here. Please do an anonymous post, do a fake account, go to a library, create a fake Facebook, and just tell us where we can find her remains. End quote. I think one of the saddest things to come out of this case, besides the obvious fact of Meagan being missing, is that her father is now in a long-term care facility suffering from dementia. Despite this, he still thinks about his daughter daily. The hope is for the family at this point that Meagan can be found and they can bury her, and that her father can attend her funeral before he also passes. And her family is still fighting for answers any way they can. As of August 24th of 2024, so just a few months ago, another search was conducted in the Sudbury area that was hosted by police, as well as a group called Please Bring Me Home. But sadly, nothing was found during the search.
Please Bring Me Home, a missing persons group in Greater Sudbury run by volunteers, hosted an event today to raise awareness of missing Canadians, all while honoring a missing Sudbury girl. The first annual Meagan Pilon Memorial Walk saw a small but mighty group that walked from York Street to downtown Sudbury. Pilon was just 15 years old when she went missing. The group wants everyone to know that just because it's been 9 years does not mean people have stopped.
Considering all the information that we do know, I think it's pretty easy to conclude that something bad most likely happened to Meagan after she left the hospital. Whether it was that she OD'd somewhere and her body was covered up because the individuals didn't want to get in trouble, or possibly she was set up with one of these pedophiles who got too rough with her, and one thing led to another and she ended up dying. I guess it's also possible that they decided to ship her off somewhere else to traffic her. Or she could have been kidnapped by one of these clients. Again, she was just 15. And as I said, because of these individuals she was associated with, it's very unlikely that any of them are going to come forward to provide much information. And the scary fact is, she could still be out there. There are many, many cases where young girls are kidnapped and are found years later alive still. It's sickening and it's horrible to think that she could still be out there somewhere. But at the same time, there's also a very large possibility that she is no longer alive. When I first was recommended this case, I had never heard of it before, and when I started looking into it, honestly, the information out there is pretty limited. But once I really started digging down, I got onto, newspapers.com, I found documentaries. The information out there is very, very scary surrounding this case, and a lot of it I feel like isn't truly out there. And I think it's something we definitely need to be talking about. Trafficking is a very real scary thing, and this young girl was being taken advantage of by not only older men, but also older women. She was allegedly being sold by a 21-year-old woman, who I'm sure at one point or another was also a victim in this situation. It seems like her friends, who were also teens as well, knew she was being taken advantage of by these 30-year-old men who were feeding her drugs and abusing her. It doesn't seem like this was a secret. And I refuse to say that she was a sex worker or that these men were boyfriends, because that's not what it truly is. She was a 15-year-old girl who was being trafficked to PDF-iles. She was a child. She wasn't an adult making adult decisions. She was a child who was an easy target, who was then being drugged and abused. And she honestly reminds me of a girl I used to know who was in a very similar situation. And it's a very, very scary world. And I recommend, if you're ever introduced or shown even just a peek inside that world, to run as far away as you can. It's pure evil, and it's darker than you could ever imagine. And Meagan was sadly dragged to the bottom of it, it seems. I truly hope that if she is out there one day, she can be found and saved. It's only been a decade. There is still a possibility. So let's take one more good look at her. At the time of her disappearance, Meagan was 15 years old and was described as being 5 foot 10 inches tall, approximately 140 pounds, with dark hair, hazel eyes, and a small scar on her upper right lip. She also had a birthmark on her inner left breast and a Playboy bunny tattoo on her left shoulder. Here are some age progression photos to picture how she may look now that she'd be in her 20s. If you have any information on what may have happened to Meagan, please speak up, please say something. I'll have the information to contact the authorities below. If you're able to share out this video, share out her missing persons flyer, go show support online to her family, please do what you can. Meagan needs to be found. But do you have any information that I didn't talk about here today? I'll be in the comment section chatting with you. And as always, I hope you stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.